When I say the words German Baron and Titanic survivor, you probably picture some dignified aristocrat helping women and children into lifeboats before nobly going down with the ship. Well, hold on to your life preservers, because the story I'm about to tell you about this world class liar is nothing like that. Meet Alfred Nourney, a 20-year-old German man who boarded the Titanic under the fake name Baron Alfred von Drachstedt. This guy wasn't just pretending to be someone else. He was living an entirely fabricated life. And why? Well, part of it was because he'd gotten a local girl pregnant and his family wanted him out of Germany. But mostly because he thought it would help him upgrade from second class to first class. And spoiler alert, it worked. At least on his Titanic voyage, it worked. But he was looking to upgrade his entire life, and that didn't work. But not for his lack of trying. And that's just the beginning of this wild ride. By the time our story ends, we'll have covered how this fake baron refused to row a lifeboat while smoking an obnoxious pipe incessantly, fired a revolver into the night sky as the Titanic sank, hogged blankets meant for other survivors, and later joined the Nazi Party. Oh, and he had the audacity to sue the White Star Line for his lost wardrobe, a lawsuit that made headlines in America and across the Atlantic. Alfred also just so happened to share a lifeboat with silent film star Dorothy Gibson, who also ended up having Nazi connection years later. It's like these two self-absorbed people were cosmically linked. This is Ty's Hot Mess History, where we dig into the messy, scandalous side of the past. So let's dive into the story of the man who conned his way into first class on the most famous shipwreck in history and lived to tell his tale. But first, if you like these videos about the most scandalous people from yesteryear who make Ty's Hot Mess History a time capsule for the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know every time that I upload content. Plus, I have 185,000 subscribers and I'm so thankful for you all. My next goal is to get to 185,001 subscribers so that I can look as cool as Baron Alfred. And please hit that thumbs up to support this video. We're free. Whether you are watching or listening, thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Now, before we jump into Alfred's lies, I want to set the scene a little bit. In the days following the Titanic disaster, newspapers across America and around the world were scrambling for information. The Times-Union reported on April 17, 1912, that White Star Line officials knew about the sinking early on, but deliberately withheld critical information from the public, issuing, quote, assuring reports instead. There was bitter criticism of suppression of vital news as desperate families waited for word of their loved ones. Meanwhile, the Kentucky Post published a list of known passengers on ship on April 16, 1912, but the headline continued, "No trace of those in steerage." The steamship company only had records of those passengers in first and second class. There were 710 people traveling in third class or steerage, but many of their names would never be revealed. The wealthy and famous passengers had their stories told and their fates tracked in detail, while those in steerage were treated almost like cargo in the press and by White Star Line. And here's something that shows you how chaotic the news coverage was. The Hartford Courant ran a story on April 16th with the headline, A.G. Vanderbilt did not sail on Titanic, complete with a photo of Vanderbilt. Think about that. A man who wasn't even on the ship got more press coverage than hundreds of people who actually died in steerage. The newspaper dedicated significant column space to assuring readers that this wealthy man was safe in London, while countless poor people, poor immigrants, who perished remained nameless. Yes, Vanderbilt's non-presence was deemed more newsworthy than the lives and deaths of hundreds of poor people. And it is against this backdrop of class disparity and media chaos that our story about Alfred Nourney, the fake Baron von Drachstedt, unfolds. Let's get into it. Alfred Nourney was born on February 26, 1892 in Cologne, Germany. His family wasn't rolling in dough, but they weren't exactly hurting for money either. They were part of a somewhat prominent merchant family descended from Heinrich Nourney, who lived back in the 17th century. The Nourneys were well established in Cologne and other cities in Western Germany where they built up their merchant business over generations. Despite having a respectable German pedigree, Alfred would later claim that he was born in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Now, I think that I know what you're thinking. Why lie about something so basic? Well, when you're committed to creating a whole new identity, as our Alfred was, you might as well go all in. His actual birth certificate lists Cologne as his birthplace, but I guess that Baron von Drachstedt couldn't possibly have come from the same place as regular old Alfred Nourney. Alfred's father, Johann, sometimes called Hans, died in May 1908 when Alfred was just 16. Johann had fallen ill during a voyage back from New York and died in a hospital in Hamburg. Maybe losing his father at such a young age contributed to Alfred's lying habit. Well, maybe that sounds mean. We don't want to be mean here, so shall we say Alfred's flexible relationship with the truth? Alfred told the Sun on April 24, 1912, that his mother was a widow who lived in Sachsenring in Cologne, claiming they belonged to the city's aristocracy, with his mother supposedly descended from nobility. This was almost certainly another one of his fabrications, designed to support his fake Baron identity. The more Alfred talked to the press, the more elaborate his background story became. Here's a little tidbit that will come up later. While attending Protestant boarding school from 1907 to 1910, Alfred went to school alongside Rudolf Herz. If that name sounds familiar, it probably should. Rudolf later became a very prominent member of the Nazi Party, as in a very important person to the demon with the most infamous mustache in history, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In Alfred's late teen years, he, like so many young guys around that time in life, developed a fascination with automobile racing. Publicly, it was said that his love of car racing is what got him on the Titanic. He was going to take the journey to America to learn about cars and participate in races. But I need to tell you why our Alfred really boarded the Titanic. And according to his own daughter, the real reason had nothing to do with cars. According to German sources and interviews with his daughter published in 2012 on the disaster's 100th anniversary, Alfred's family had actually purchased his ticket to get him out of Cologne and away from a scandalous situation. As the General Anzeiger newspaper reported, based on conversations with his daughter, his family, quote, had bought the ticket presumably to prevent the son from a well-to-do family from having a fling with a staff member, which had not been without consequences, end quote. That staff member was Miss Yarkanska. You'll hear her name again after Alfred gets on the ship. According to the German General Advertiser, she was a maid employed by the Nourney family, whom Alfred had impregnated. The family's solution was to ship their troublesome son off to America to sod his horns, which is an expression I'd never heard, but is apparently a German expression for calming wild behavior. And Alfred's family thought that it was best that he sawed his horns far away from her and far away from this scandal. His daughter he later had in life, Elke, recalled in interviews that this was something that her father had studiously omitted from his own retellings of the Titanic story. Even in the 1960s, when the entire family accompanied him to Hamburg for a television interview, according to her, that was the entire family, including the dog, which she said, my father carried in a shopping bag, a detail that she recalled with a smile. But the point is that he never mentioned this scandalous reason for his journey. And that's just why you have me. So now we know that instead of being sent to America to pursue a career in automobiles, as he claimed, Alfred was essentially being shipped off by his family to avoid the scandal of becoming a young, out-of-wedlock father. But rather than keeping a low profile during his journey, you'll see that our Alfred upgraded to first class and mingled with the elite passengers like Guggenheim and Astor. It seems that avoiding attention was never Alfred's strong suit. To that end, before he left, Alfred decided he wasn't going to travel as plain old Alfred Nourney. No, he was going to reinvent himself as Baron Alfred von Drachstedt. That would help him fit in better with his new first-class cohorts. And I mean, why not? He was going to a new country where no one knew his name. America was famous for giving people a fresh start and a new lease on life, so he'd take his chances. And he didn't just pick a fancy name. He went all out on the costume. According to verified newspaper reports of his insurance claim that he would later file, he spent over $2,000 on a new wardrobe for the trip. That's over $60,000 in today's money. We're talking expensive clothes, walking sticks, 2 sets of toilet articles, and a fountain pen. But I want you to just stick a pin in this right now, because after the ship goes down, Alfred is going to add some stuff to this long list of luxuries that, according to him, went down with the ship. I'll leave it to you to decide whether or not you believe Baron. The Evening World on April 24, 1912, offered yet another explanation for Alfred's visit to America, reporting that Alfred had become bored with aviation and motoring and was coming to see whether New York struck his fancy. Apparently, Alfred had been interested in aviation before heading to America, a detail that would explain all of those aviation clothes in his wardrobe. But that's our Alfred, never one to let the truth get in the way of a good lie. So here's where the story gets really interesting. Baron Alfred, boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France on Wednesday, April 12, 1912. But get this, he initially purchased a second-class ticket number SC Paris 2166 for £13. Once on board, Alfred took one look at his second-class accommodations and said, "This simply won't do for a baron." He marched straight to the purser's office and demanded an upgrade to first class. And because he was using his fancy fake baron title and most likely wearing one of his expensive new outfits, they believed him. So they let him pay a £38 surcharge, almost 3 times his original ticket price, and upgraded him to first-class cabin A17. According to a lot of the newspapers, his request to be transferred to first class was granted largely because of his supposedly aristocratic status. This detail makes his con even more fascinating. It wasn't just about money. It was about the power and respect that came with a noble title, even a completely fabricated one, and simply looking the part. If fake it till you make it was a person, it would have been Alfred. Alfred was so giddy about his first-class accommodations and fancy new friends that he wrote a postcard to his mother from Queenstown saying, quote, "Dear Mother, I am so happy being first class. I already know some nice people, a Diamond King. Mr. Astor, one of the wealthiest Americans, is on board. 1,000 kisses, Alfred." End quote. His postcard home sounds like something that a 13-year-old girl would write about meeting her favorite boy band, But no, Alfred was a grown-ass man pretending to be nobility just so that he could rub elbows with some of the richest people in the world. His self-esteem must have been as low as his morality. On April 13th, Alfred's fourth day on the Ship of Dreams, he sent 2 telegrams home, one to his mother at 12:20 p.m. that simply read, when translated to English, "Wireless greeting." The second one was to a Miss Yarkonska. Do you remember this name from earlier? She's the one who Alfred's daughter said was likely carrying his child. She was the scandal that made him leave town. The more you learn about Alfred, you'll see that the craziest thing to learn about her is that somewhere on Earth, there was some woman willing to put up with this guy. So, if you're holding out hope for love, this should bring you some sense of comfort. If Lion Alfred can find someone to put up with his BS, anyone can find someone. Now, I have to note that Alfred addressed the telegram to his mother as Wolf rather than Nourney. So I'll go on and tell you that after Alfred's father died, his mother remarried in 1920 to a man named Wolf in London. But in 1912, she would have still been Adele Nourney, not Wolf. So either Alfred was already using his future stepfather's name for his mother, which would be odd, or there's more to this family story than meets the eye, which wouldn't be a surprise. Maybe his mother was a big fat liar too, or maybe Alfred could see into the future. Anyway, let's get back on the ship before I'm accused of being mean. The Titanic's journey had been uneventful for the first few days, but Sunday, April 14th, was going to be a different day in every way. For this would be Titanic's last full day above water. Captain Edward J. Smith canceled a scheduled lifeboat drill on this day, a decision that would later be scrutinized in the investigations that followed the disaster. Throughout that day, the Titanic received at least 7 iceberg warnings from other ships in the area, but Captain Smith merely altered the course slightly southward without reducing the ship's speed. That evening, our fake Baron Alfred was playing bridge with William B. Greenfield and Henry Blank in the first-class smoking room. The air temperature outside had dropped to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water temperature was a frigid 28 degrees. Cold enough to kill a person through hypothermia in less than 30 minutes. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg dead ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship hard a starboard, a nautical command that means to turn the ship's rudder to the left, which makes the ship turn to the left. And the engines reversed, but it was too late. The starboard side of Titanic scraped along the iceberg, creating a series of punctures below the waterline. Within minutes, water had poured in and risen 14 feet in the front of the ship. Alfred briefly left the smoking room to investigate the disturbance. He rushed to the squash racket court on G deck because it was nearly at the bottom of the boat. He saw 6 inches of water covering the floor, so he went back and told friends that Titanic was in danger. But none of them believed him. One of them even said that, quote, "It doesn't matter because Titanic cannot sink." So Alfred allowed his friends to persuade him into feeling a sense of comfort, even though he knew that he saw what he had seen. He went right back to continue playing cards. He did what so many others had done who were initially shaken by the feeling of the impact of Titanic hitting the iceberg. Continued on with the night, because after all, they were on an unsinkable ship. What Alfred couldn't have known was that Captain Smith had actually received warnings about icebergs in the path of steamers. The captain of the French steamer La Durand had radiographed the Titanic on April 14th about the afternoon and sent it to the position of the bergs and warning the liner to look out. The Titanic's captain acknowledged the warnings and thanked the captain for the information, and he also carried on with his night as he had planned. Despite these warnings, he maintained the same speed through the iceberg field. But for the first-class passengers playing cards in the smoking room with Alfred, nothing was registering that serious danger was just minutes away. Then finally, after seeing some crew members frantically shuffling on the deck, Alfred went to take another look at the squash court. This time, he took the card players with him, and when they reached the court only a few minutes after Alfred's first inspection, they found nearly 5 feet of water. The group of card players learned that what they had felt earlier was the ship colliding with an iceberg, and now it was time to get to safety. And Alfred did so with relative ease. He even had time to prepare himself way better than most of the people who were fortunate enough to be rescued by Lifeboat. Alfred was able to return to his cabin, write a quick note to his mother, change from his evening dress into warmer clothes. He had the sense to not make a fashion show about it and dressed himself in a sweater, vest, and life jacket. And he packed a little food for himself as well as a bottle of whiskey. He had time to do all of this and still managed to make his way onto the first lifeboat forward with the greatest of ease. By midnight, lifeboats were being readied for launch. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats with space for 1,178 people. With more than 2,200 souls on board, it was apparent from the start that everyone wasn't going to make it out alive. At 12:15 a.m. on April 15th, Captain Smith ordered the wireless operators to send out distress signals. Although by 1912, SOS had been the official distress signal for a few years, the operators sent out both SOS and CQD signals. CQD was the outdated stress signal, but no chance could be taken. Anyone on the receiving ends of those wireless transmissions needed to know without a doubt the Titanic needed help. The problem was that a lot of those people on the receiving ends of those distress calls did not understand the Titanic was in need of help. It was quite common for wireless operators to send out prank distress calls. And because very few people believed that Titanic could sink, a lot of people thought that Titanic's operators were just joshing around when they sent out her SOS. The Carpathia received a distress signal from the Titanic at 12:20 a.m. with the message, "Come at once, we have struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man." The Carpathia responded that it would come to their aid, but it was 58 nautical miles away, more than 3 hours of sailing time. Another piece of information to make a dark night even darker, because by this time, it was clear to the ship's engineer that Titanic would sink in less than 2 hours. Now it was 12:45 a.m., and officers on the starboard side of the ship were ready to launch the first lifeboat. The calm that had existed moments before was gone, and there was a commotion and panic filled the air. Alfred managed to board lifeboat number 7, again the very first lifeboat lowered from the Titanic, shortly after 12:45 a.m., before many passengers even realized the severity of the situation. Also at this time, the first distress rocket was fired. Anyone who hadn't gotten the message likely understood by this point the time for fun and games was over. Baron Alfred's lifeboat number 7 was designed to hold 65 people, but it was lowered with just 28 on board. And who else was in lifeboat number 7 with Alfred? Dickinson and Helen Bishop, the young millionaire honeymooners from Michigan. While on one of the many stops on their honeymoon tour, Helen was told by a tarot card reader in Egypt that she would survive a shipwreck and an earthquake before dying in a car wreck. The accuracy of her reading is actually eerie, and we've covered her on a story here before. Alfred was also in the company of his card-playing cohorts, Henry Blank and William Greenfield in number 7, as well as the one and only Dorothy Gibson, the silent film actress who, only weeks after the disaster, would star in the first Titanic film. Lifeboat number 7 was lowered into the water and made its escape from the calamity. It's probably not a surprise to you that everyone in number 7 was rescued. But they did have a couple of problems. One was that the drainage plug at the bottom of their boat was missing. Their other problem was Alfred. Well, they had a solution for one of those problems. The women aboard offered up some of their lingerie items to stuff the drainage plug hole. Some of the men offered some of their smaller clothing items too. These pieces of cloth clearly weren't going to make a tight seal, so freezing water crept into their tiny vessel, covering their feet. But at least they would survive. As for their other problem, they'd just have to bear the Baron. Lifeboat number 7 passengers watched the terror from the distance, with every now and then one of them saying something delusional like, "I hope that they all make it off of the Titanic safely." Maybe not those exact words, but that exact sentiment. Right around 2 in the morning, it finally became obvious to Lifeboat number 7 passengers that most of Titanic's passengers were not going to be able to escape from the ship. George Hogg, one of the crew members on number 7, ordered that their lifeboat be rowed away from Titanic because the risk of being sucked down with it was so high. So those 3 crew members in number 7 and passengers did as he said and rowed away from Titanic with all of the might that they could muster. All of the passengers except Baron Alfred von Drachstedt, that is. This clown never picked up an oar to row at all. Alfred and his fellow passengers in lifeboat number 7 spent a long, dark, cold morning in the Atlantic before they were rescued. There was talk amongst them about how horrifying the screams were of the people who had not been so fortunate to find their way into lifeboats. That led to another conversation that was quickly shut down. "Hey, our lifeboat isn't full. Let's go back and get some more passengers." That was the sentiment of one of the crew members. Well, he was outnumbered 27 to 1. "We can't go back. What if too many people try to get on our boat? They'll all be fine. They can get on their own lifeboats." The crew member then informed the 25 passengers that he knew for a fact that there weren't enough lifeboats for every passenger who had booked a ticket, and some of them would surely sink with the ship or freeze in the ocean. That didn't change anyone's mind. They sat there in lifeboat number 7 and listened to the screams and cries until the screams and cries stopped. Sure, the number 7 passengers were slightly inconvenienced when some of the icy water started to enter their boat, but they managed. The coldness in the air was nearly unbearable, but they would survive. Then came the moment that made it undeniably clear that there would be casualties in case anyone on lifeboat number 7 was still trying to comfort themselves with the delusion that a lot of their fellow Titanic passengers would survive. As number 7 drifted into the freezing darkness, the horror of Titanic's final moments unfolded. At 2:17 a.m., wireless operator Jack Phillips sent a final distress signal before the ship's lights went out completely. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic broke in two between the third and fourth funnels, and the stern disappeared into the ocean. An estimated 1,500 people were left in the water, where the temperature was just 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of them would have died of hypothermia within minutes. Number 7 passengers listened as Titanic's former passengers and now hostages were submerged into their icy grave. It was a mixture of yells, shrieks, and moans. And then, under the water, they could feel the explosions. These were most likely from the stern imploding as it sank. After the unsinkable sank, Lookout George Hogg wanted the number 7 passengers to row to the spot of the sinking to pick up some more survivors. He knew, as anyone should have known, that they wouldn't last long in the icy waters. But when he told them of this suggestion to go back and pick up people who were surely just freezing to death, once again, every single person objected, Baron Alfred included. That's kind of an odd stance for a baron, a man of nobility who is culturally associated with bravery. But you and I know that Alfred was no real baron. We also know that he didn't even row one stroke on that lifeboat. Shortly after he hit the shores of New York, the world would know how this entitled, lazy bum conducted himself, and how even first-class ladies took up oars to row. But he never did. We'll get there. Then there was Herbert Pittman. He was the Titanic crew member in charge of lifeboat number 5. While drifting in the early morning, he saw Alfred's lifeboat and called out to his passengers. When he got close enough to see that lifeboat number 7 only had 28 passengers, he felt that his own lifeboat was crowded. It held 40. Again, all of the lifeboats were designed to hold 65 people, and it's as if these survivors were looking for some kind of luxury lifeboat survival experience. When Pittman got close enough, he put some of the survivors from his lifeboat into Alfred's. Then crew members tied both of the lifeboats together so that they could go back together and rescue some more survivors. Of course, I'm only kidding. I wish that I were telling the truth. They tied their 2 lifeboats together so that they would be more visible to their rescue vessel. Combined, they had enough space to save 62 more people from freezing to death. Instead, they only looked out for the people who were already safe. There wasn't even one word uttered about going back to rescue more people. Dorothy, the silent film actress in Alfred's boat, right about this time, was talking to one of the men who she was playing cards with before the disaster struck, William T. Sloper, an American banker. She told William that hardly any people would be dead because surely most of the passengers got away in lifeboats. We all know that that wasn't true. Chances are that Dorothy also knew that that was a lie when she said it too. Too bad that she was only silent on film, because those are words that she definitely could have kept to herself. But one of the Titanic crew members quickly put that lie to rest when he interjected and said, even if all of the lifeboats were filled, not more than a third on Titanic could have escaped. That reality brought lifeboats number 5 and number 7 to silence. There was coldness, death, and stillness in the atmosphere for the next few hours. Then, roughly at 6 a.m., the RMS Carpathia arrived to rescue those who had survived through the wee hours of the morning. Thankfully, the Carpathia crew didn't think that those SOS signals were a prank. Sure, it didn't get there before Titanic went down, but the captain got there as quickly as he could without putting his own crew and passengers in danger. Considering the distance that he had to travel through an iceberg-filled North Atlantic Ocean, it was an extraordinary feat of seamanship by Captain Arthur Henry Rostron to arrive safely and close to the time frame that he expected. He would go on to receive the Congressional Gold Medal for his heroic efforts, and rightfully so. Lifeboat number 7 was the third to have its passengers loaded into Carpathia. And guess what? Alfred's entitled behavior didn't stop after being rescued. You would think that after narrowly escaping death, it might make one appreciate life even more and just be a better person. But shortly after lunch on the Carpathia, Baron Alfred went to the smoking room and put on a most disgusting display of ungentlemanly behavior by making himself comfortable on a pile of blankets. The blankets were intended for distribution to all of the survivors, but Alfred made a bed of all of them for himself. A young woman entered the room, noticed him lounging on the blankets, approached him, and pulled the uppermost blanket. This caused our fake Baron to roll onto the floor. The people in the room broke into applause, and Alfred quickly disappeared. That's how the story is usually told, but there's a little more to the story. A more detailed account of this incident comes from the book On a Sea of Glass, The Life and Loss of the RMS Titanic by Fitch, Layton, and Wormstead. According to their research, the first woman asked him if she could have a blanket for herself. He refused to move. Well, of course, after this, the woman was incensed by his behavior and said, "To think of it, the like of you saved and women left to drown. Shame on you." Then she yanked the blanket from underneath that pitiful excuse for a man, causing him to roll onto the floor while the witnesses cheered for her and ridiculed him. He deserved every bit of that and worse. It seemed that everyone was fed up with Alfred and his pompous ways. After Blanketgate, Alfred tried to send a telegram to Cologne. The message? Titanic sunk, saved on board Cunard Line Carpathia, completely destitute, no clothes on. Alfred. Remember that because you're going to hear more about his clothing after he gets off of the Carpathia. Well, finally, on the night of Thursday, April 18th, the Carpathia arrived in New York, delayed due to bad weather. It was 9:25 p.m. and it was very dark outside, but that did not stop the Titanic Welcome Committee from waiting to see their loved ones get off of their rescue vessel. There was celebration and merriment at the dock for all of those who were fortunate enough to be able to reunite with loved ones. But at the White Star Line offices on Lower Broadway, the scene was one of chaos and grief. According to the Times-Union, men, women, and children, many hysterical and weeping, swarmed the offices of the White Star Line. They were, quote, begging for some word of comfort regarding the fate of their loved ones, end quote. But they got little satisfaction. All the company would say was that there had been loss of life, but they were unable to state how much. This was particularly ironic, given that the vice president of White Star Line, P.A.S. Franklin, had earlier declared, quote, "We place absolute confidence in the Titanic. We believe the boat is unsinkable," end quote. So, understand that the whole unsinkable thing wasn't just something that people were saying. That is how White Star built the ship, and when their vice president said it, it wasn't a marketing stunt. This was the company's firm belief. By the time Franklin spoke those words, that their boat was, in fact, unsinkable, the Titanic was already at the bottom of the ocean, along with more than those 1,500 people who had learned the hard way that Titanic was quite sinkable. It would still take some time, but finally, the incorrect news reports about who was alive and who did not survive could be sorted out, for the most part. But in the meantime, one report went out that would have made Alfred sue the newspaper if he had seen it. On April 17th, the Free Press Prairie Farmer actually listed Drachstedt Baron von among the third-class passengers. Clearly, it was a mistake, but we all know that Alfred, after spending almost all he had to pretend to be a wealthy first-class passenger, would not have been pleased to see this. And while I'm sure that all of the male survivors were happy that they survived and just thankful to be alive, now they would have to explain to the newspapers why they were alive when so many women and children were dead. Now, I personally don't believe that chivalry is dead. I really don't. But it isn't prioritized today like it was in 1912, and that's just an observation, not a critique of all male humans. That being said, in 1912, it was expected of a true gentleman to willingly surrender his life so that women and children could survive when it came to disasters like this one. And that's why the stories of men like Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and John Jacob Astor IV are only a few of the stories of first-class gentlemen passengers who helped get women and children to safety and stayed behind to go down with the ship. They would have faced so much shame had they safely returned to New York, while headlines were printed about hundreds of dead women and children. It was their duty to die on that early morning, and many of those first-class men who had the same access to a lifeboat that Alfred had went bravely to their deaths instead. Now, alive, safe, and dry, most men who had survived the Titanic had to justify to the press and the public why they got into lifeboats instead of going down with the ship. They claimed that they were helping with the oars, or that they jumped in at the last minute when there was extra space, or that they were needed to help navigate. Well, we know that none of these are the case with Alfred. As a matter of fact, the more that Alfred's fellow Lifeboat number 7 passengers talked to the newspapers, the worse he looked. And I mean even worse than what I have already shared with you. For instance, remember Helen Bishop, the millionaire honeymooner? Well, according to her, and later everyone else in number 7, Alfred sat motionless while others rowed. She told the Pawtucket Daily News on April 20th, 1912, quote, "There was a German baron aboard who smoked an obnoxious pipe incessantly and refused to pull an oar." End quote. And yes, those others who were rowing included the women. Remember how I told you that Alfred packed a little food for himself before he got into the lifeboat? Now, this is how I picture him. I can just imagine him chomping on a sandwich, laying back and relaxing while everyone else pulled their weight. This sandwich is really hitting the spot. I wish I had a little more mayo. Too bad you guys don't have anything to eat right now. Looks like we're going to be out here for a while. You broads are doing a great job rowing this boat, and looking good while doing it too, I gotta tell you. Can't wait to get rescued to get to some real food. Yeah, so I told you that Alfred brought himself a little something to eat, but I didn't tell you one more thing that he brought on the lifeboat: a revolver. He claimed that it was for defending himself in the Wild West, because apparently Alfred thought that America in 1912 was still the Wild, Wild West. But he didn't use his revolver when he got to America. He used it while the lifeboats were being loaded. This guy is the worst. During the night, he fired off all his cartridges into the darkness. I'm sure that was super reassuring to the terrified passengers in his lifeboat and those trying to leave the Titanic. Third Officer Pittman told the Baron to cut it out. He warned him that he might need to use that revolver later to get the attention of a rescue vessel. Imagine being in a lifeboat in the middle of the freezing North Atlantic. Everyone around you is scared out of their minds, and this guy is just sitting there, smoking his pipe, occasionally firing a gun into the air like he's at some kind of weirdo celebration. But Alfred's firearm and lazy behavior on the lifeboat were not the end of his 15 minutes of fame. Get ready for this. The first thing that Alfred did when he got to speak with the press was to tell the reporters of his bravery in those early morning hours on the lifeboat. That's right. Not only did he row his lifeboat gently to the Carpathia, poor Alfred rowed so hard that he injured himself. The Sun and multiple newspapers reported that Alfred was taken from the Carpathia by friends to the German hospital. He was reportedly, quote, suffering from the reopening of an old wound caused by his exertion of the oars in the lifeboat in which he escaped, end quote. This literally contradicts the accounts of every other passenger in his lifeboat. I know that when the other number 7 passengers read this little detail in the papers, they must have believed that Alfred was smoking something way stronger than tobacco in that pipe. But even this lie about rowing his lifeboat to the point of injury wasn't the last of Alfred's press run. One more audacious story would come out about Alfred just days after the Titanic sank, while literally hundreds of families were still trying to find out what really happened to their loved ones, while they were hoping that maybe, just maybe, their loved ones were still missing and not dead. I know that stuff seems important to some people, but Baron Alfred had something going on that was far more significant than these missing people who were probably at the bottom of the ocean. You see, Alfred was missing. Now, try to hold back your tears. I know that this is going to be hard on all of us, but Alfred was missing. I'm sorry, you guys, it's hard for me to get through this. He was missing his entire wardrobe that he traveled with. And gosh darn it, someone was going to have to pay for this crime against humanity. Headlines ran all over the United States. I mean, from sea to shining sea, and in the United Kingdom too. Baron Alfred von Drachstedt's wardrobe woes made front-page news for the next week. And of course, I have to share just some of those stories with you. This is where our fake Baron's story gets even wilder. On April 23rd, 1912, just 5 days after arriving in New York, Alfred's lawsuit made front-page news. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline declaring, "Baron mourns clothes loss," with a subtitle, "His $2,133 wardrobe went down with the Titanic, arrives in sweater." My God, the horror. The next day, newsreaders would learn a little more about the Baron, who definitely wanted his clothing back, but he didn't need anybody in America calling him a Baron. That was disclosed when the Chicago Tribune on April 24th reported under the headline, "Baron mourns clothes loss," that Alfred reached here Thursday night on the Carpathia, attired in a sweater, a pair of trousers, and a life preserver, and with only a few German marks in his pocket. The newspaper described him as a tall, blonde German youth of 20 years who says that he has the right to prefix Baron to his name. But he wanted to make it clear that even though it's his birthright title, you can just call me plain old Alfred. The same day, the Evening World went with an even more sensational headline. Survivor to sue company for his $2,320 wardrobe, followed by Baron von Drachstedt had elaborate outfit, including 15 nightshirts. It seems like people thought that was a hell of a lot of nightshirts. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle and other papers reported that Alfred had filed a claim against the White Star Line for his belongings, valued at $2,320.50, approximately $76,000 in today's money. According to The Sun, his lawyer, yes, he obtained a lawyer, Arthur W. Opp, said, quote, "It would appear from the company rules that what is known as the $100 limitation would not apply in this case, which would make the claim for the wardrobe depend entirely upon its value," end quote. So yeah, this case clearly required immediate attention. I have to stress here that at the time these stories ran, it wasn't even 10 days after the ship sank. Sure, people ended up filing suits for lost belongings, but at this time, there was still a scramble going on just to find out who was dead or alive. But Alfred, being Alfred, and always seeing himself as the most important person in any situation, had to deal with his clothing now. I just have to say that Alfred's cockamamie story also highlights the stark class divisions that defined both the Titanic and the media coverage that followed the disaster. While Alfred, as a first-class passenger, had his name published on lists of survivors and his lawsuit reported in major newspapers, many of those in steerage remained unnamed and unmourned in public. The Kentucky Post reported that, quote, "The steamship company had records only of those passengers who were traveling first or second class, while the names of many probably never will be revealed," end quote. And to me, it's just sad to think that stories like Alfred's were taking up space on pages while some families spent 1 or 2 cents every day to read the latest updates, hoping to learn something, anything about their steerage traveling loved one. But back to what was important, at least to Alfred, his wardrobe. So for the rest of the sane world, Alfred and his lost wardrobe became a subject of mockery in the press for the next few weeks. On April 27th, Brooklyn Live ran a satirical piece titled "Here on Business, Evidently," which opened with, "Had there been no greater loss from the sinking of the Titanic than the trousseau of Alfred von Drachstedt, who shrinks from employing his title Baron in a democratic country, we should feel poignant regret at being deprived of a sartorial spectacle of rare elegance." So, trousseau is just another word for wardrobe, and sartorial basically means having to do with clothing. So yes, this writer's words are dripping in sarcasm, telling us what a tragedy it is that people won't get to see those grand clothing articles that Alfred wanted the new world to see. Clearly, the loss of his wardrobe was in fact the greatest loss from the whole Titanic catastrophe. Cue the violins. The article went on to disparage Alfred, noting his, quote, 8 business suits. Think of it. What an enormous amount of business he must have intended to transact. End quote. It finally concludes with a jab at Alfred's lack of a dress suit. Surely he did not intend to wear a dinner coat to fashionable evening functions, or is that the proper thing in Germany? Well. The Arizona Republic took a similar tone in an article published on May 10th, titled "A Sartorial Tragedy." The paper referred to Alfred as, quote, one of the real sufferers by the Titanic disaster, who was mourning with a grief that refuses to be assuaged the loss of his entire wardrobe, end quote. The article noted he was of two minds as to suing the value thereof, because he doubts the ability of American tailors and haberdashers to replace in proper style the things made in Germany. Then it proceeded to list his extensive wardrobe items, concluding that those who are conversant with joyous raiment could fully appreciate the scale of his loss. In other words, if you couldn't afford the exquisite wardrobe pieces that Alfred had, you just wouldn't be able to understand the magnitude of his loss. You know, the poors just wouldn't get it. But back to our Baron and his impressive wardrobe. According to the Evening World, his lost belongings included 10 suits of clothes, 4 overcoats, 20 white shirts, and 20 colored ones. Clearly, that's an archaic term. It was 1912. We wouldn't call them colored shirts today. We'd call them African American. I'm totally kidding. Just trying to see if you're still with me. Anyway, back to this list. 20 colored shirts, 20 negligee shirts, 15 night shirts, 40 pairs of assorted hose, 120 scarf pins, 2 hunting suits, an aviation coat, 10 pairs of gloves, 2 top hats, 1 opera hat, and 7 silk tennis shirts. Now, even all of this isn't everything that Alfred claimed to have brought on board the Titanic. He created a very detailed list that was printed in multiple papers. I would never bother with reading each and every single item to you, but I will say this. Those initial lists in the newspapers were just the beginning, because Alfred would add a couple more big-ticket items to his list. And they were so big that they forced one to question the validity of anything on his wardrobe list. After all, we already know that Alfred is a liar, running around calling himself a baron. And I want to make it very clear to you that most of the news sources thought that Alfred was full of malarkey from the start. Maybe they didn't know enough to question his self-proclaimed baron title, but many people thought that it was odd that this 20-year-old traveled with all of those business suits and he had not one lick of business to transact, didn't own his own business, and didn't have any appointments set up at anyone else's business. So people found it even more fishy when he just so happened to remember, days after his original claim was made, that he also had diamonds hidden in his pockets when he left France to board the Titanic, because nothing says, "I'm not compensating for anything," like bragging about hidden diamonds. And he also claims to have lost most of the cash he was traveling with, too. How convenient. 750 German marks. And you know that our Alfred needed that money. I mean, needed it back because he lost it at sea, because everything that he was saying was very true and not a lie at all. In US dollars today, that set our Alfred back another $6,000 in cash. Now, please humor me in the comments section and let me know. If you traveled clear across an ocean to a foreign country, how many days would it take you to realize that you were missing $6,000 in cash? If your answer can't be measured in days, but in seconds instead, I completely understand. And I have no idea of the value of Alfred's missing diamonds. According to The Sun, Alfred said that when he got back to Europe, he planned to stay in England and Germany for a while, and that he'd been studying aviation and motoring before coming to the United States. The paper noted that the Baron doesn't say whether he fancied staying in America for a while before returning home. So it seems Alfred was keeping his options open, even as he was filing claims for his lost wardrobe. This seems to conclude Alfred's 15 Minutes of Shame press tour. There's no definitive record of how his lawsuit concluded. The absence of follow-up stories announcing a successful settlement suggests it either went nowhere or was settled quietly for far less than he demanded. The ridicule in the press likely didn't help his case, and White Star Line ultimately settled all claims for far less than what was initially sought by survivors and victims' families. It looks like Alfred disappeared from New York and went on to live a relatively normal life, except for maybe his brief stint as a Nazi. Yeah, so after all the immediate attention died down, Alfred faded from public view. It appears that he may not have returned to Germany until 1919, after World War I ended, and by that time, his native country had been completely transformed by the devastating conflict, and the aristocratic world he had been pretending to belong to was rapidly disappearing. During the 1920s, Alfred worked as a salesman for Daimler-Benz, finally getting into the automobile business he had claimed was his purpose for going to America when he hopped his lying ass on the Titanic. It seems fitting that the fake Baron who had lied his way into first class would end up selling luxury cars to the wealthy. Anything to stay connected to the upper echelon. Alfred's life in the 1920s seems to have been exciting in its own way. He competed in motorsports, racing cars, and flying airplanes. It seems he still had a taste for adventure and luxury, and I guess in some ways, he did end up living the fast life he'd always wanted. But here's where our story takes another dark turn. In the 1930s, like many other Germans, Alfred became a member of the Nazi Party. According to his denazification file, yes, such a thing existed after World War II, he was not politically prominent, but he still joined the organization responsible for some of history's worst atrocities. Remember Rudolf Herz, Alfred's schoolmate? While Alfred was a nominal Nazi Party member, Rudolf became the commandant of Auschwitz, overseeing the murder of more than 1 million people. It's a chilling connection that links our fake Baron to one of the darkest chapters in human history. Alfred held various jobs during the 1940s after World War II, mostly still in the auto sales industry. He eventually settled in Bad Honnef, Germany, becoming an honorary member of the Rot-Weiß Tennis Club. Apparently, he was a pretty good tennis player. And when you think of how his first instinct after the impact with the iceberg on Titanic was to run down to the squash court, it tracks. Maybe he had been playing a lot on his first days of his voyage. According to his list of missing items, he certainly had packed enough outfits to play every day. He married twice and had 2 daughters. One was Elke, who told us about the pregnant girlfriend, and another daughter named Ute. As noted in a 2009 edition of the Charlotte Observer, Alfred Nourney, aka Baron Alfred von Drachstedt, ended his professional life as a retired car salesman. He died on November 15, 1972, at the age of 80, and was the last surviving adult male first-class passenger from the Titanic, though, of course, he had originally purchased a second-class ticket. His story isn't one of heroism or nobility, despite his fake baron title. It's one of privilege, entitlement, and self-preservation at all costs. But it's also a fascinating glimpse into how one person navigated the social hierarchies and historical tragedies of the early 20th century. So, the next time you hear someone talk about the nobility of the Titanic's first-class passengers, remember the man who upgraded himself to first class through deception, refused to row his lifeboat, sued for his lost clothing while bodies were still being recovered, and spent his later years calmly recounting how the sounds of drowning people sounded like a siren, one of his quotes. And remember how the press devoted columns to wealthy survivors who weren't even aboard, while hundreds of poor passengers remained nameless in life and in death. If you found this story about one of Lifeboat 7's most notorious passengers intriguing, you'll definitely want to check out my video on Dorothy Gibson, the silent film star who shared the same lifeboat with our fake Baron. Her story is just as fascinating, from starring in the first Titanic movie just 1 month after the disaster, wearing the same clothes she had on that night, to her later entanglement with the Nazi regime, though unlike Alfred, she eventually joined the Italian resistance. She's another incredible chapter in Titanic history, and she is a hot mess. My sources for this story are on the screen. I hope that you have enjoyed this tale so far. If you love these scandalous stories from history that make Ty's Hot Mess History a time capsule for the culture, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Give this video a thumbs up. It's free and helps a ton. Whether you're watching or listening, thank you for letting me be a part of your day. This video has been brought to you by me. Well, me and my new YouTube channel, Verified YouTube Guide. Are you just starting your YouTube journey and feeling overwhelmed? Don't worry, I've got you covered. My channel, Verified YouTube Guide, is your go-to resource for practical, step-by-step tips to grow and monetize your channel. It's literally follow-along video tutorials. I'm showing you the steps I took to get 180,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you don't know how to do something, you can just copy my work one step at a time. From setting up your channel to showing you how you can earn money at any stage on YouTube. And I'm not just talking about YouTube ad revenue. If you have something important to say or a service to sell, start talking about it on YouTube now. Don't wait. Subscribe to Verified YouTube Guide today, and let's build your channel together. You don't have to figure this out alone. The link is in the description box. I'll see you there.